Hymnals?
Go ahead. Guess you'll be singing a solo. All right, we are up to chapter 24, verse 15. And this is actually the longest chapter in the book of Genesis. I'll try to get a good bit of the way through tonight, but I can make no guarantees. Verse 15. It came about before he had finished speaking that, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had had relations with her, and she went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please let me drink a little water from your jar." And she said, "Drink, my lord." And she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. Now, when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw also for your camels until they have finished drinking." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. Well, that right there clearly answered the servant's prayer. You'll notice that in all of this, Abraham had told his servant specifically to find a wife for Isaac from his relatives. And the woman that comes up to him there at the well as he's standing around is essentially the daughter of Isaac's cousin. Why do you think? Now, Isaac at this point was probably 37, maybe 38 years old. I say, we know that he was 37 when Sarah died. Why might he possibly be 38 by this point?
Takes a while to get where you're going.
Yeah, keep in mind that the servant has been sent to Haran, which is several hundred miles north, with 10 camels and a bunch of supplies. He didn't get there the next day. Could have taken him months to get there. So by this point, Isaac is probably, if he's not pushing 38, he is, at least close to 38 years old. Rebekah, we don't really know how old she was, although it's likely she was probably considerably younger. Why do you suppose that what evidence do we have that she would have probably been a good bit younger than Isaac?
Wouldn't they normally be betrothed by?
Yeah, in all likelihood, they'd have had her married off fairly quickly. All right. But, so what we have here is the servant has indeed found himself a relative, although he doesn't know this yet. She has met the requirements for which the servant had told the Lord, said, "Whoever comes up and I ask for a drink, and she not only gives me a drink, but offers to water my camels," so that'll be the sign. And it's interesting that God actually honored that. I wish it was still quite that easy that God did that, although he doesn't often, but he apparently did then.
This is orchestrating his plan.
Oh, yeah.
That's why he does this.
All right.
I mean, he's not going to do this willy-nilly for any of us because we want it. It's
Well, but
it's because it's part of his plan.
True.
It's to make things happen the way they're supposed to happen.
I don't discount that. What I'm saying is that I find unusual is the servant is the one that comes up with the sign and just cooks up this, well, if this happens and then this happens, that'll let me know. And in fact, that's what happens.
Maybe he didn't just cook it up. Maybe the Lord put that in his head.
Well, of course, we can always guess those things. All right. Verse 21 says, meanwhile the man was gazing at her in silence to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. Then it came about when the camels had finished drinking, which that may have actually taken a little while, especially since how many did he have?
10.
10 of them. Camels had finished drinking, that the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her wrist weighing 10 shekels in gold. A 10 shekel bracelet is not a light piece of metal. Said, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room for us to lodge in your father's house? Now, what does that tell you right there?
U.S. presumption.
Nope.
Doesn't know the lineage yet.
Please let me know if there's room, or if you have room for what?
Yes.
For us. He wasn't there by himself.
Maybe he's talking about the camel.
I don't think the camels were going to spend the night in the house. This servant clearly the servant had servants. We don't know how big this entourage was, but there was more than just the servant and
He
his
wasn't
10
handling
camels.
10 camels by himself.
No, he would not have been able to handle all those camels by himself. The servant had some servants. It's interesting, though, that other than this passing reference in the plural, we're told absolutely nothing about any other servants that were here. But as you just mentioned, he didn't come there with all those supplies and 10 camels by himself. He might have been able to pull along 3 or 4 tops, but not 10 of them. Verse 24 said, and she said to him, I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. Again, she said to him, we have plenty of both straw and feed and room to lodge in. Then the man bowed low and worshiped the Lord. Now,
So she knew he was referring to the camels.
no. I don't think so. But what we find in this,
Sorry, man, I'm trying to help.
you know, you're stealing Larry's thunder.
Sorry, Larry.
All right, but there's a couple of issues here that's okay. If they were very easily able to handle 10 camels, the head servant, and however many other servants he might have had with him, what does this tell you probably about this branch of the family?
They're well-to-do.
Wealthy too.
The whole family was rich. They may not have been as rich as Abraham, but God had blessed all of them. Because also, it would not have been unusual back then for an average family to live in a home that may have only had a couple or 3 rooms in it. You'd have had a living area, possibly a kitchen area, and a bedroom. That would have been about it. But she says they've got room for the whole shooting match, which tells you they had a house that was, by their standards, probably a mansion or bordering on it. She also identifies herself. Notice she doesn't just say, well, I'm Rebekah, or even the daughter of Bethuel. She gives him a quick rundown on the family history. Said, but hearing this, what's the first thing that the servant does?
Thanks the Lord.
He worships. Doesn't even respond to her, or if he does, it's not recorded here. First thing he does is he worships. Verse 27 says, and he said, blessed be the Lord. Of course, notice how it's spelled. He's calling God by name. The God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers. Now, this tells you that the servant knew all, at least had some familiarity with who all of Abraham's relatives were. It's even likely that the servant may have even known many of them. Why do you think that?
He was the eldest servant, so he'd probably been with Abraham for a very long time.
He was the eldest servant, which tells you he may have actually known them from back in Haran, or even before that. This servant, who probably was not as old as Abraham, very clearly could himself have been quite elderly, which again would tell us that, as Merrill just mentioned, he'd probably been with Abraham a long time and may know some of these people, personally. He just, of course, would not have seen them for many years. Then the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now, there's an interesting nuance here in how this story is told, beginning in verse 28.
Mother's household?
The mother's household. The whole thing is about Abraham's relatives and the fact that she's a descendant. Well, she's the granddaughter of Abraham's brother. She's Abraham's grandniece. But from this point on, the focus seems to be on the mother and everybody except the male part of the family. So now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Of course, we'll see more about him later. And Laban ran outside to the man at the spring. And it came about that when he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrist, and when he heard the words of Rebekah his sister saying, "This is what the man said to me," he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the springs. Now, I want to make clarification here. Rebekah at this point is not just wearing gold bracelets on her wrist. And this ring that it's talking about is not a ring on her finger. It's a nose ring. Here's the big question. How do you suppose this servant managed to talk Rebekah into putting on a nose ring? And the question is her nose already pierced? Or is it just kind of crimped on there? What's that?
How do you know it's a nose ring?
It said, she obviously had a clean.
As we get a little later into the chapter, it actually tells us she had a ring in her nose.
Okay.
So it's not just a guess on my part.
Okay.
The Lord probably, she knew the Lord, and the Lord probably, she had the feeling that's what she was supposed to do.
I don't know, but I'm just saying that how many of you ladies, if you just met some guy on the street that just claimed to be a long-lost relative servant, oh, by the way, here, would you put this ring in your nose?
He didn't even tell her any of that. She doesn't know who he is. He didn't tell her that he's
Actually,
Abraham's servant.
well, it depends. In verse 27, the question is whether or not he says this quietly to God or whether he said it out loud in her hearing.
Okay.
So
Yes.
it is possible she did know if he said this out loud. But the question is, again, unless her nose was already pierced, what woman is going to take a ring from a guy she doesn't know? Like, oh yeah, here, let me put it in here.
Maybe she didn't install it. Maybe she put it on a chain around her neck.
Nope. It tells us as we get a little later into the chapter, it was a nose ring.
Maybe
Well,
she was already pierced for a
I
nose
agree
ring
with
then
that.
because it was a custom.
And it was a custom back then, but the
It was a custom in the 60s.
yeah, it's a custom now.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is, the reason I'm bringing this up and even dickering about this is what this tells us is that there's probably some conversation that went on that Moses did not relay to us. Moses has given us the down and dirty because, well, of course, who wrote Genesis? Just want to remind you that. So if you wonder what Moses got to do with this, Moses is the one that wrote this. And of course, was Moses alive then? So the question you have to ask yourself is, where did Moses get the details?
From God.
Yeah.
He dictated it to him.
So this has been through different hands, and either Moses is here, knows some oral stories passed down from, generation to generation, that coupled with whatever God told him on Mount Sinai as he wrote all this. My point is that clearly the conversation has been trimmed down to the bare minimum. There had to have been more of this conversation than what Moses relayed here, which also would tell you how she may at this point know who he is. All right, verse 31. And he said, this is Laban, "Come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I've prepared the house and a place for the camels?" Now notice at this point, the focus of all of this shifts to Laban, the brother, who's, by the way, Laban apparently is the firstborn. He's the elder brother. And it was a custom at that point that in matrimonial negotiations, a lot of times the elder brother would be the one to carry on the negotiations. The parents would observe and nod or indicate their approval or disapproval, but the actual negotiations would normally be carried out by the elder brother. Anybody want to guess why that might have been?
Because he was the seed to carry on the...
Well, maybe, but also look at it from this perspective. If I've got a daughter and I know that you want to take my daughter with you to marry her off, and you're here to negotiate for a dowry, I'm not going to tip my hand as to how much I expect or what the deal is going to cost. I'll let somebody else do the negotiating for me, because then I'll let them play the heavy while I sit and just kind of watch and observe, because I don't want to come across, especially since we're talking now the potential parents-in-law. I'm not going to tip my hand as to where I'm standing on all this. I'm going to let somebody else do, be the heavy and do the negotiating for me.
Isn't that also basically an Oriental custom that the man in charge sits back and lets his underlings do the negotiating? And he doesn't talk at all?
That's exactly what this is. So which also tells you that custom went back a long time. So, and notice also, who's the father in this? Nope, Nahor is the grandfather. Bethuel is.
Bethuel.
And Bethuel is only mentioned a couple of times in this whole deal. It almost seems like Bethuel isn't even part of the negotiating at all. He's just sitting, apparently, maybe sitting around the dinner table with his arms crossed and kind of maybe nodding or giving some, giving the eye to Laban or whatever to let him know what to negotiate. But we see very little about Bethuel in here. All right, but he said, come on in, got all this.
I'm confused. We're already talking about it being a marriage negotiation, and all he's done is ask for a place to stay for the night. Was by offering her the gold ring and the gold bracelets, was that a step toward the marital process?
It's all about the water and the
All
camel.
about the nose ring.
No, I'm just saying you got it on the nose.
Oh, okay.
As soon as he pulls out the gold rings, he basically tipped his hand as to what he's there for.
Okay.
Even though he hasn't stated what his, because of course later on in the chapter we'll see when he actually says, no, I'm not going to eat until I tell you my business. They probably already had a real good idea what the business was when he pulls out the gold, starts, pulling out the gold. Which is why, well, there's two reasons why Laban is the first one out the door. Number one, because he's the older brother, and and his sister comes in with this, a gold ring in her nose and gold on her bracelets, and he's like, what is going on?
Okay, so what
Who's here for my sister?
if she had
Accepted the gold ring and her brother wasn't willing to let this go through.
then he'd have taken the gold rings back, or well, he might have let her keep them, but he probably would have taken them back. It would have been appropriate for them to offer them back, and he'd have moved on to some other relative. But as Merrill mentioned already, clearly God's directed this whole process where he's up, he's got one up at bat, and he hits a home run right off the bat, right on the first pitch. But anyway, there's another reason Laban is the first one out the door when he realizes his sister walks in with gold on her wrist and in her nose.
Tell the parents.
Well, no, the parents probably are already home. What do we know? We don't know this. If we read this in order at this point, we would not know this about Laban yet. But since all of us in here know really what happens a generation later, what do we already know about Laban?
He's a slimy, greedy guy.
He's a slimy, greedy little, gimme kind of a guy. He sees gold walking in the door, and he's like, all right,
Here's an opportunity.
We got a business opportunity here. Don't want to pass this up. So, and I think that's the reason that Moses tells a story like this. He's already tipping his hand, so to speak, in the way he's writing to let us know Laban's a slimy, greedy little guy. He may be Rebekah's brother, but he's greedy. All right. So anyway, verse 32 says, so the man entered the house. Then Laban unloaded the camels. Why do you think Laban wants to unload the camels?
See what he's got.
You better believe it. You don't think Laban's not looking in those sacks and looking on to see what that camel's got? I bet by the time he got back inside, he knew everything that was in there. You better believe he's looking. Laban unloaded the camels, and he gave straw and feed to the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Of course, it's highly unlikely Laban did any of this stuff personally, because they've probably got servants of their own if they're, this well off.
Laban
also
was just ordering the servants.
Laban's probably ordering his servants around, while Laban's probably, I'll take care of the, those sacks. I'll put them over here in the corner while he's looking to see what's in them. But when food was set before him to eat, he said, this of course the servant, not Laban, he said, I will not eat until I've told my business. And he being Laban said, speak on. Of course he wants him to speak on, because Laban wants to get to the point.
Wants to get to good stuff.
Yeah, you better believe it.
How much can I get for my sister?
How much can we get for the sister? So he said, I'm Abraham's servant. Now here's another interesting thing here. When Abraham left his family, was he Abraham?
No, he was Abram.
Abram. So here the servant says, I'm Abraham's servant. So either word has already, one of three things is taking place here. That's why, again, this tells us Moses hasn't given us all the details. He's told us only what we need to know. So either somewhere in the process in the last 50 years, because you figured it's been at least 50 years since Abram left his family. So either they have sent word back and forth as caravans came through and whatever primitive mail system they may have had back then to let them know that, by the way, our master Abram is now going by the name of Abraham, or somewhere in the process of this conversation, this is one of the details that we haven't been told. It's like, by the way, Nahor's brother Abram, God renamed him Abraham. Or the third possibility is they might have looked and go, who's Abraham? And he would have had to have told them at that point. But again, that would be a detail that would not be necessary for the story. My only point here is that this just confirms for us that we're only getting the big picture, not all the dirty little details. What's that?
I was at 30,000 foot level.
Yeah. All right. That's an interesting perspective from a man that flies around.
Yeah, that's what they say in the Air Force.
All right. Verse 35 said, "And the Lord has greatly blessed my master, so that he has become rich." And some translations say he's become great, rich. In that day and age, it wouldn't have made any difference how he described it. It would have come out the same. "And he has given him flocks and herds and silver and gold and servants and maids and camels and donkeys." And what do you think Laban's thinking by this point? Cha-ching. Bingo. "Now Sarah, my master's wife," again, she wasn't Sarah. She would have been Sarai back the last time they saw her. "Now Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master in her old age, and he has given him all that he has." Again, I guarantee you Laban is like, oh, it's all going to one guy?
Who's going to marry my sister?
Who's good? Because you think if he's thinking ahead, he's thinking, okay, if that's the guy he's here, to get Rebekah for, yeah, keep talking. "And my master made me swear, saying, You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house and to my relatives and take a wife for my son. And I said to my master, Suppose the woman does not follow me. And he said, The Lord before whom I have walked will send his angel with you to make your journey successful, and you will take a wife for my son from my relatives and from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my relatives, and if they do not give her to you, you will be free from my oath. So I came today to the spring and said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now thou wilt make my journey on which I go successful, behold, I'm standing by the spring, and may it be that the maiden who comes out to draw, and to whom I say, Please let me drink a little water from your jar, and she will say to me, You drink, and I will draw from your camels also. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son." Now, out of all this now, if Laban is listening, he's got it figured out at this point. Yep, we got one single heir, and he's here to get a wife for that one guy who's going to inherit everything Uncle Abraham's got. Before I had finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder, and I went down to the spring and drew, and I said to her, Please let me drink. She quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, Drink, and I will water your camels also. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. Then I asked her and said, Whose daughter are you? And she said, The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. And I put, now here we go, Mario. And I put the ring on her nose. Also, notice how he describes this. He didn't just hand it to her. He says, I put the ring on her nose. And the bracelets on her wrist. Which tells us also, if Rebekah was willing to submit to this and let some guy she'd never seen before in her life put a ring in her nose, and again, you got to assume she probably did have her nose pierced, because otherwise that would have been kind of a painful experience right there out there by the well. But to have some guy you'd never seen before, that you just walked up to, and he said, Give me something to drink, and starts pulling stuff out of his travel bag. What does this tell you about Rebekah's feeling on the matter?
Tells me the Holy Spirit was at work.
That's one possibility, but it also tells us that maybe Rebekah's thinking that maybe I've hit the jackpot. Somebody's, because you figure if Rebekah is of marrying age, she has not yet been married off, and lo and behold, some guy comes up and basically says, on behalf of my master's son, I'm here to propose marriage to you. And of course, he didn't say that, but when he starts pulling gold out of his bag, that's the message. That's the message he's giving. Rebekah may be thinking as well, hot dog, cha-ching, that's one possibility. There's another possibility also. In all probability, Laban may have been several years older than Rebekah. And if Rebekah is like the younger sister, and she's the one doing all the servants' work in the house, what else might she be thinking?
Time to get out of the house.
This is my escape ticket. So, and of course, not to say that they're mutually exclusive. She could be thinking both things. Like, this is my escape ticket, and I'm about to marry into a rich family.
And I've been praying for this. Here it is.
This guy's master, my uncle, whoever he is, that I've never met, got more money than we got. And I can get away from my brother Laban.
Judging the way she is, she seems like a real kind-hearted person. The way her brother is, I'm sure she didn't really probably like him too much.
Good possibility. Now again, all of this, we can only speculate about, but the reason I think it's worth at least considering is as you read through this, if those issues are not there, it makes you wonder, other than just God putting it in her heart to do this, why would she be so willing to submit to this, and she's never met the man before? And as we continue on, which I don't know that we'll get to that far this evening, but when the time comes later on, the next day, that they, and we'll see this in the passage later on, they want to hang around and have a 10-day long party, which I think is probably just so they can negotiate a little bit more. But the servant basically says, no, I need you to decide right now. Hey, my master's waiting. I got to get back on the road headed back. And they finally leave it up to Rebekah, and we know that her answer is, yep, let's go. She doesn't even want to wait around and say goodbye to mom and dad and brother. She's like, let's go. Which makes me wonder if she's at that point in her life, and again, it wouldn't have been unusual for girls of that age, say 16, 17, 18 years old. And what does any teenager in a household naturally want to do?
Get out of the house.
Get out of the house. She may have been a bit of a rebellious teenager and thinking, this is my opportunity to get out from under all this. And of course, what's every teenager thinking? When daddy says, you live in my house, you obey my rules, what's the natural response that every one of us in here have had?
I'll stop living in your house.
I'll stop living in your house. Because let's face it, while generations have come and gone, that's one aspect of teenagers that probably hasn't changed since, Cain and Abel. All right. Let's see. Where did we go?
48.
Yeah, we were at 48. And I bowed low and worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had guided me in the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now, right there, he has laid it out. Everybody in the house now knows beyond any shadow of a doubt he's here for Rebekah. So now, if you are going to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, let me know, that I may turn to the right hand or the left. What does he mean by that?
I'll leave.
Well, not just leave, but what was that, Bruce?
Basically that he'll go look somewhere else.
Yeah. He figures, you're not the only relative in the area. My master just told me to go find a relative. You're not the only relative here. Because also we know from the genealogy that we've already been given that Nahor had several sons, and those sons all had families. So you figure if they're all living in the general confines, if Bethuel's daughter isn't willing to go, he figures now we don't know if she had any sisters or not, but we can probably a pretty safe bet she had cousins in the area, and any one of them would have met the requirement for what Abraham wanted. All right, verse 50. Then Laban and Bethuel answered. Notice again at this point now, the mother is not part of the conversation. She's just sitting there, because what do mothers-in-law tend to do? Oh no, they listen all right. They listen like this. Mm-hmm.
Give you the
How do
evil,
I
give you the evil stare.
give you the evil eye?
But Dad's actually involved now.
Yeah, Dad's actually said something. Laban and Bethuel answered and said, "The matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you good, bad or good." Now, that right there is a very important issue, or that a statement. He said, "The matter comes from the Lord." What? Even if Laban himself might have been a greedy little, creep. What does that tell you about this branch of the family that we've suspected, but now guess what? They've confirmed they know who God is. They are not pagans. Which tells us, again, this is why Abraham sent his servant back to them and not elsewhere or from the women of Canaan. Again, just as a reminder, I have read numerous commentaries that all try to claim that Abraham was singular in his belief in the Lord, that the whole other bunch of them were all pagans.
What about Melchizedek?
Well, Melchizedek was a Canaanite. That's a section. I'm talking about where he was from. I've come across a lot of commentators that try to claim that the rest of Abraham's family were all pagans. I think this disproves that they did know God. And it may explain to us why God did choose Abraham, because beginning with Noah to Shem, right on down the line, that there was a group of them that continued to worship and know the true God. And that Nahor and before him, Terah, that these were all God-fearing people. All right, verse 51. "Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken." Well, this is probably Bethuel saying this. Daddy's probably said, okay, if this is a matter that God himself has determined, well, then who are we to say otherwise?
The oldest son probably also wouldn't have the authority to make that determination.
And
about
I
his
think that's why at this point, as Moses is telling the story, now he brings Bethuel back into it. Because if Laban has been conducting the negotiations, at this point Bethuel hears the story and realizes that this man is basically telling us that this is God's will. He pretty much at this point steps up as the patriarch and says, "Time out." Probably looks at Laban and says, "Back off, boy." Looks at the servant and says, "If this is God's will, do it." Because you'll notice up until this point, Laban's the one conducting negotiations. Bethuel is just sitting there watching. Verse 52 said, "It came about when Abraham's servant heard their words that he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord. The servant brought," now here's what Laban's been waiting on. "The servant brought out articles of silver and articles of gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. And he also gave precious gifts to her brother and to her mother."
But not her father.
Well,
Get the dowry.
it may have been either Bethuel declined or he might have just been polite and gave them to the mother on behalf of, both parents. It says, "Then he and the men who were with him," here we go. "Then he and the men who were with him." So we know there's at least two other servants that were with him.
Yeah, they mentioned for earlier too.
Mm-hmm.
About when
It just said us.
Us.
We don't know how many us's there were.
no, there was another reference to the men with him.
When the
Previously.
servant first took off.
Possibly. But in any event, again, doesn't tell us how many, but we know there are obviously at least 2 servants with the head servant. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night. When they arose in the morning, by the way, we'll go down to verse 60 and call it quits there. When they arose in the morning, he said, "Send me away to my master." But her brother and her mother. Notice at this point, Bethuel is not a part of this conversation. Bethuel's already made up his mind. He said, if it's God's will, do it. But probably behind his back, because it says her brother and her mother said, "Let the girl stay with us a few days, say 10. Afterwards she may go." Why would they want to hold her up for 10 days?
Milk him for some more.
You better believe it. Mom and brother figure that guy's camel still got plenty with him. He's given us a few gifts. Maybe we can get some more out of him. And he said to them, "Do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master." And they said, "We will call the girl and consult her wishes." Notice again, they don't ask Bethuel. Why do you think they don't ask the dad?
Because he already told them they could go.
Yeah, he's already told them what his opinion was. So why wouldn't Bethuel be a part of this conversation?
Because they're going behind his back to try and negotiate.
You bet. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. They're behind Bethuel's back. Either Bethuel's out, on the, dealing with the farm, or out with the servants, or bottom line is, even Bethuel, he could be out in the outhouse for all we know, but they're probably doing this behind his back. So they said, "Well, we'll call Rebekah." They said, "We'll call the girl and consult her wishes." Because they're probably figuring they can strong arm Rebekah into doing what we tell her. Then they called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." By the way, in Hebrew, "I will go" is a one-word response. It's almost like she just looks at him and says, "Yep." There's no, there are ways to express in Hebrew, the pronoun, that she could have said "I." Of course, there is no future tense in Hebrew, so you literally cannot say "I will go." It would be "I go," or "I decide to go," something like that. But you don't even have to include the pronoun in Hebrew. She essentially gives them a one-word response, which kind of is like, "Are you willing to go?" She probably just looks at him and goes, "Yep." Which tells us they probably were again trying to strong-arm her into hanging around for 10 days so they could milk them for some more. Rebekah's probably knows her family too well for this. She figures, no, I'm the one that's going to get, profit out of this. I'm out of here. Thus they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse with Abraham's servant and his men. Now, so we're going back with a fairly good entourage here. So Rebekah's not only going by herself, she's taking her own personal servant with her. Which now, what does that confirm for us? From what we have.
They're rich.
Yeah, they're rich too. They've got enough that even the teenage daughter has got a personal servant.
She's treated like a princess.
Yeah. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "May you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of them who hate them, of those who hate them." That's just a standard blessing, as daughters headed out the door, and so they naturally want to send her away with at least some family blessing. Now, whether Bethuel came up with that or Laban, we have no way of knowing because it just says "they said." But I think this whole thing sets us up for, and the reason I again go into this kind of detail on this, and is that if you understand the kind of man Laban probably was, and he tipped his hat in this particular story, you understand why later on down the line when Rebekah sends Jacob back, that he gets tricked into working 14 years for Laban. My question then, and of course we'll look at it more when we get that far down the line, but why Rebekah would have been willing to send her favorite son back to Laban, knowing Laban was a trickster, unless she thought that, well, surely he won't do that to his own nephew. Anyway, questions this evening?
It was back in verse 32 when he was talking about taking care of the camels. And water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him.
Right, but again, we don't have any idea how many.
Yeah.
All we know is at least 2.
I just
Bruce?
heard, some regard this as being a foreshadowing of Christ in the church. Because since the time that Isaac was being sacrificed,
Mm-hmm.
all right, you don't hear of Isaac at all until he sees Rebekah. So there's that longing that, basically, and also that the servant is not named at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that, if someone's representing the Holy Spirit, he never gets named.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Isaac as Jesus, you have Rebekah as the church, and the servant is the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
The Holy Spirit is the one who gets the bride for Isaac. Isaac does not appear back in the story until he sees Rebekah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
There's also something else in this too that would very much support this, what you're mentioning. In this part of the story, the servant consistently refers to my master Abraham, the father. And we'll get to this part on Sunday evening. But when he finally gets back home and Rebekah asks, who's that coming in down the road? From that point forward, the servant stops referring to Abraham as my master, and he says, that's my master. The focus at that point shifts from the father to the son. Which again would very much go right along the illustration you're describing there.
it's just like a foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, the servant never points his finger at himself. He does the will of the Father, but he consistently is pointing the church toward the Son. Good point. Anybody else? Lou, would